We are officially recording. So we're going to go ahead and get started with today's workshop. And Maggie, you can introduce yourself now or when the slide comes, whatever you feel makes the most sense.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I can introduce myself more in depth in the next couple of slides, but my name is Maggie Royer, she, her, hers. I'm currently in Minnesota right now, and I work at the statewide Domestic Violence Coalition. And before we really get into the material today, I just wanted to offer up an encouragement to take care of yourselves. We're not going to be talking specifically about domestic violence or sexual violence or child abuse today, but we know that a lot of people on this webinar might identify as survivors or might work with survivors. And sometimes being in a space that brings to mind those experiences can be difficult. So kind of in the same vein as what Brenison mentioned, please just feel free to turn off your cameras or step away as you need to at any point throughout the webinar. And please know that you can always exit the webinar at any time if something comes up for you personally, no questions asked.
So a few other reminders in addition to the prompt to take care of yourself is just some things that writing comes very naturally for some people. For others, it's not something that comes as naturally, and that's totally okay. Anyone from any experience level can absolutely journal and benefit from these experiences. There's different ways that you can do it that we've talked about before of, writing physically on a piece of paper. It can even be typing on your phone or a different device. Find whatever method works the best for you and makes the most sense. You can even just think about it. You don't have to physically write it down if you don't want to. And that this process of writing about your experiences is uniquely your own, right? Nobody else's. And so you are the expert of your own experience and your own life. And there's a lot of ways that writing can help you regain that sense of agency and power through that. And it can be intensely personal. It can bring up emotional topics. So again, if you're feeling emotionally unsafe or anything that you start to think about makes you just not feel great in your body or whatever the case is, you can take a break. And we also have a lot of resources for providing mental health support if you think that that makes sense for you as well.
We also just wanted to kind of lay out a couple of group agreements before we get started. So just making sure that we're respecting others' experiences. This isn't going to be a space where people will probably share personal experiences or personal details, especially pertaining to trauma. But if that does happen, we just want to kind of reiterate receiving and believing and sharing the space. We were going to do breakout sessions, but because our other facilitator couldn't make it, we'll be kind of doing more larger group sessions. So just making sure that we're not pressuring anyone else to share. And this isn't a space for editing, so we're not going to be editing people's writing. It's really more of a space rather for sharing, listening, learning, and reflecting. And also keeping in mind that we need to uphold confidentiality always, but especially because this is a workshop for survivors or people who work with survivors. Making sure that we're mindful that everyone has an opportunity to be heard if they'd like to be heard and if they'd like to share, that we avoid assigning intentions, motives, or beliefs to others, that we call people by their names and use their pronouns. And then also thinking about if you are anticipating sharing personal details or personal experiences, that we just be mindful that not everyone in this space might be at the same stage in their healing process or in their journey. And so some things might come up during this space that might be triggering or distressing for some people. So we kind of just wanted to lay the groundwork here because a lot of people on this call may have personal experience with abuse or domestic or sexual violence.
So this is just a brief overview of the next 1.75 hours. So we're thinking 2 hours is a little much and maybe a little less than that, but sometimes an hour and a half is not enough. We got feedback on our last workshop that they wish it was a little bit longer because it felt a little rushed at times, just because some people were very engaged and participatory, which is wonderful. So we wanted to make sure that we did have ample amount of time to get through the content that we have gathered for you all today. So I'm not going to walk through this. You can just glance at it, see if you need to start making dinner at a certain time, what we'll be up to. But that's a brief breakdown. We are kind of splitting it into two halves. So the first half is a little more focused on reflection and things of that nature, and then the second half is more about intention, setting intentions for the present, for the future, what have you. So those are just a little bit of what to expect from this workshop. And then a little bit more about us. So again, my name is Brenison Wheeler. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator at Women's Advocates, which is one of the first domestic violence shelters in the United States. We're located in St. Paul, Minnesota. We were founded in 1974. And my own personal journey with journaling has been it's really honestly been a lifeline for me, even since I was little. Since I was young, I loved to either write stories or just write things down, share notes with people. I found that it was one of my preferred ways of communicating with my friends, even when I was at a young age. So I found a lot of value in being able to use that as an outlet. And sometimes, maybe if it didn't feel safe for me to share with other people in my life, I could at least get it down on paper. And so that was a way to express my experience, my um, kind of my conceptualization and making meaning of things that have happened, or even just saying, like, this is how I feel, or this is something that happened very matter of factly. And so that's something that I've been trying to be more intentional about in this year and in more recent years too, of being able to use that as a way to share with others or just connect with myself more deeply. And then I'll let Maggie talk a little bit more. She has some more explicit experience in the writing field, so that's why I love that she's on this webinar as a facilitator. So you can go ahead and introduce yourself and share more about your experiences.
Thanks, Brenison. So as I mentioned, my name is Maggie Royer, and I'm the Youth and Prevention Program Manager at Violence Free Minnesota. We are the statewide domestic violence coalition in Minnesota. So we're really focused on supporting our member programs. We have about 90 member agencies across the state, and many of them provide direct services to victim survivors of domestic violence. So that's kind of what my day job is. But then for the past 5 years, I've also run a literary and arts journal for survivors of abuse. And that's called Persephone's Daughters. And the slides will be sent out afterwards. So in the slide, there is a link to Persephone's Daughters if anyone is interested. So I've run that journal for 5 years now because I identify as a survivor myself. And when I was kind of going through that, I had also been writing for several years prior, and I didn't see that there was a journal or space like that existed for survivors. And survivors have different relationships to writing and art. Some hate it, some love it, just like anyone else. But I wanted to create that space for survivors who find art and writing about their experiences to kind of be therapeutic. So that's the background that I bring to this webinar today.
Yeah, definitely go check it out. They have a newsletter and everything that I'm signed up for, and I love reading and seeing the art and all of the literary pieces that are shared in each issue. So I would definitely recommend it. Okay, so Maggie, you can lead this. I'll start to pull it up.
So we wanted to gauge how people feel about reflection and intention before getting started. And when we say reflection, we really mean reflecting on the past. And when we say intention, which we'll go more deeply into later, we mean kind of thinking about what you intend in the future, what your goals are for the future. And it's okay if you don't have a very specific grasp of what these two terms mean right now, because we will talk about them more deeply. But just wanted to gauge what people's thoughts or experiences are on that right now. So we're going to create a word cloud, and Brenison has put the link to the word cloud in the chat. So if you're able, you can put the link to the word, or you can click on the link to the word cloud and it will open up for you. So just put a word regarding how you feel about reflection and intention, or a couple words, and we'll just give people a few moments.
Can you see the word cloud forming?
I can see it forming.
You can?
Yeah.
Okay.
So a lot of words are coming in right now to the word cloud. Um, and the way that the word cloud works is that the words that have more people writing them in are going to be bigger. So the bigger words that I'm seeing are hopeful, necessary, empowering, important. So a lot of really positive words. One person or a couple of people said healing. One person said anxious, which I think is very valid. A lot of people might have complicated feelings about reflection and intention. Someone said painful, and we'll talk about that later. Reflecting on your past, especially if you're a survivor, can be painful. Someone said freeing, intimidating, forced. Okay. So there's a lot of different feelings about reflection and intention. While most of them appear to be positive, there are some negative ones. And we just wanted to hold space for that, that it's okay if your feelings about reflection and intention aren't positive. Or, maybe you feel negatively about it now, but you'll feel positively later. You might kind of flip back and forth. It's okay to have complicated feelings and to hold all of those at once.
Absolutely. You can continue to add words, but I'm going to switch back to sharing the PowerPoint slides. So we do have a quick poll here. So we would like to know how you would describe your experience with journaling. So this is all anonymous. Your name won't be associated with the option that you select. And of course, with any of the polls or any prompts that we send out, you can definitely um, write it in the chat and let us know what you think. So while you all are submitting your responses to that, you'll see on the screen there are some little tips for journaling, including, making it your own, finding ways to customize and decorate your journal, making it something that you want to open up. If it is something physical, even if you do like a Word doc or something more digital, you can add photos and things that represent who you are, how you want to feel, anything like that. There's a tip to, keep a list of prompts ready. There's, no rules. You can set a timer if you do want to stay focused or write for a certain amount of time. You can even close your eyes and reflect. There's a lot of different things, and you absolutely don't have to consider yourself to be a writer to journal at all. Anyone can if they would like to. And then, of course, taking some consideration into safety, right? So, especially as we're thinking about the pandemic and things of that nature, you might be in close quarters with someone that you might not feel safe or comfortable sharing certain things with. So, taking these things into consideration, maybe using a password protected apps or being mindful about where you store your journal, things like that. And then we also talked about how journaling and writing can be a helpful emotional safety tool for people. So it can be, it's often recommended as a resource for people who have experienced gaslighting, which I'll put a link into. We don't have a ton of time to explain what that is, but if someone has experienced gaslighting where someone is making them question or doubt their reality or their perception of what's happening, sometimes they're encouraged to write it down so they can be reminded of what they had experienced, because some abusive people can be very manipulative and make you think and doubt what you have experienced. So there's things for that reason too, but also just to have a space for you to be you, unfiltered, and a space to feel secure. So I'm going to end the poll. So it looks like 41% of us said that I've journaled a few times in my life. 19% said that they've never journaled before. And 14% said either I journal a few times every few months or journaling is a huge part of my life. So there's definitely a spectrum of different experiences on today's call, which is really great. So thank you for participating in that poll. Oh, and there is a link to the PowerPoint slides from our very first journaling workshop if you do want to check those out. So this expands on these topics a little bit more. And Maggie?
We also wanted to talk about healing and just acknowledge that healing looks different for everyone. Healing is not necessarily linear. Sometimes if you've experienced trauma, you might go through phases or cycles where you're feeling really good and things are looking up. And then maybe at another point in time, you're not feeling so good. So it's completely normal to go back and forth through those cycles. We also know that sometimes forgiveness might be a part of certain survivors' journeys, and for others, it's not a part of their journey. I think that sometimes survivors might hear messages about you need to forgive the person or the people who hurt you in order to heal. And that's not necessarily true. It's the survivor's choice whether they want to forgive the person or people who've harmed them. So we do want to acknowledge that. And it's also important, I think, to think about anger and emotions that everyone might not necessarily consider positive. Sometimes a certain amount of anger can be healthy. Sometimes survivors hold on to anger to remind themselves that what was done to them mattered and that it harmed them. And so thinking about how healing can look different for everyone. And I know this graphic is a little difficult to see, but again, it will be sent out in the slides afterward. But we wanted to include this graphic about the pyramid of healing. So thinking about sometimes healing involves courage and commitment and accountability and kind of moving up that pyramid to have self-care and compassion for yourself and then feeling more whole. And I think that's something that a lot of survivors struggle with, is feeling like because of the trauma they endured, they're somehow not whole or they're broken in some way. And we know that that's not true, but for some survivors, they might feel like part of their healing journey is reaching a point where they can feel physically or mentally or spiritually whole.
So we have another poll for you to kind of share your feedback and your thoughts about reflection before we kind of dive into this topic a little bit more. And again, these options aren't all encompassing. So if there's something that, mostly you agree with, or you would prefer to just send your thoughts about this topic in the chat, we absolutely encourage you to do that too. So just on the screen, you can see some photos. I really liked the 2020 year in review of just some things that, I resonated with this of, I did some learning, did some growing. I feel like I did my best given the circumstances. I did try new things, whether that was, something on my own volition or not. And then kind of just showing, I'm human and there's a brand new year, kind of try again, things like that. But I also really like this idea of a to feel list. So I'm very achievement oriented, productive oriented of how can I do all of the things possible that I can. And one thing that I really like about this of, how can I feel grounded? What's something that I can, whether it is do or think about that will allow me to feel creative or nourished or abundant or supported or fulfilled. I think all of those different prompts are really cool. So I think setting even an intention in the beginning of the day to say, how I would like to feel creative today somehow instead of I need to, write 4 poems or something more quantitative. And then just thinking of, how did you feel these different emotions in 2020? What did that look like? So I'm just looking at the poll here, and it looks like 56% of us are saying yes, it can be a useful tool for some people to make sense of what has happened in the past and how it shows up in their life now. Things have a way of cycling back if not acknowledged in some capacity. And then the other 44% reported that they feel like sometimes it depends on the person and the situation. It can be helpful to not deny that things have happened, but also not the best to dwell or relive it. So I think that, it's interesting. No, absolutely no one said it was not useful at all. So I'm glad that each of you will find the next few slides relevant to your life in some capacity. So we'll dive right into that. So this is a note about trauma and the relationships at different points in time. So I talk a little bit more about memory and how the brain is impacted by trauma in this webinar. It's linked on this slide that you can click on once you have access to the slides. But something that I talk about in that is, trauma can impact our ability to recall specific details of events or even entire events as well, due to the effect that the trauma has on the brain. And that is normal. And it's thought to be one of the ways that your mind, can protect you during, experiences of traumatic events. Another thing is that over time, reflective journaling can help you to clarify your understanding of your own personal timeline, impactful events, or emotions that are associated with your experiences. And as we kind of talked about a little bit in that poll, romanticizing or dwelling on the past could take you away from understanding the present moment. So if you can, try to avoid dwelling and use reflection to understand how the past informs your current self. And so, for a lot of victim survivors, their experiences can be and feel disjointed or fragmented in some way. And the ability to kind of integrate the past, present, and future can help, be a pathway to feeling a sense of wholeness and connectedness. Sometimes people develop anxiety because they're hyper focused on their future, and that way of operating has been their lifeline. It's been a survival technique. And some people can, have feelings of depression if they are ruminating in the past and feeling like they are self blaming or feeling regret or any other kind of emotions in that capacity too. So we can definitely use reflection to mindfully understand how those things that have happened in the past inform where we are now and where we want to go. So, a little bit more about reflecting without reliving. So, I think one common misconception is that in order to address or deal with trauma, you have to talk about what has happened, the details, the logistics, kind of step by step. And I think that there's a lot of different, there's value to being able to do things like that. There are therapeutic techniques. One is called narrative exposure therapy. There's others called trauma trauma-informed cognitive behavioral therapy, different ones like that, that you do write a specific trauma narrative or you do kind of go through those details. But there's also a lot of other options too, where you might not have access to that professional mental health support, so it may not feel safe for you to explore those on your own. And there's other kind of like modalities or things that you can do to kind of tap into your past and your experiences, but through the body. And one of those things is through trauma sensitive yoga. So I again put a link on this slide to trauma sensitive yoga. You can also type in TCTSY in your browser and it'll come up. And they talk a lot about the different foundations of, being in the body, starting with the body as a way to address and recognize traumatic experiences. So if you're interested in something like that, there's a resource for it. Additionally, so these are links to things that I just mentioned. So the first link has the mental health support resource on like how to find mental health support where you live, and also trauma therapy resource handouts if you do want to explore different things. So a lot of things that we've already talked about have been mentioned in those resource handouts. So that's definitely available to you. But reflections can also be an opportunity to think about the lessons that you've learned, and also have opportunities for gratitude. And especially in a year like 2020, sometimes gratitude can feel very powerful and very important, and others it can feel very painful, or it can be very difficult for people who have experienced a lot of adversity. And they might struggle with finding things that they are grateful for. So I think that keeping that in our perspective is really important, but can be a value of engaging in reflection from time to time. So a little bit more on reflection. It can be used for a deeper sense of self-understanding, so thinking about who am I, and how have the things that I've experienced shaped who I am, the way that I think about things, the way I approach things, the way I perceive things. It can also help you think about what your values and your boundaries are, what's important to you, what are your priorities. And I put another book resource because for me personally, in my own journey, this is the book, Embodied Healing, and it's also through TCTSY, the resource I shared earlier. And it's voices specifically from survivor and facilitators who have practiced trauma sensitive yoga. And I think for me, I experienced a lot of meaning making through hearing and bearing witness to other people's stories and how they've made sense of it and other topics. One, interoception. Again, Google it if you want to learn more about it because it's just been something that has been so clear and helped me connect the dots and help me feel a little bit more integrated in my experiences and who I am. So that's just another little plug if you do want to read more about a way of understanding yourself and other people on a deeper level. Okay. So these are some prompts. These were actually written by Meg, who kind of put this section together. So I won't read through all these, but you can take a picture of it. Again, you will receive the slides, so you can wait until then. But these are just some prompts for you to think about if you do want to reflect. You can we're going to have some more resources later that talk about specific prompts you can do every single month and then kind of read through and see what has happened each month and compare the monthly reflections. There's a lot of different ways to approach it. You can even just take out a piece of paper and start responding to a random question. So there's a lot of different ways to approach it, but we did want to provide you with a few explicit tools and examples for prompts. I'm going to take a pause really quick and look at the chat. Okay.
There hasn't been anything new. It's just been me summarizing.
Summarizing. Great. Thank you. Yes, we did have an attendee that requested summarizing kind of what we're talking about. So thank you for doing that, Maggie. Okay, so we're kind of getting closer to the activity now. So right on time. Perfect. So you'll see these words again in later slides, but we wanted you to kind of think about just look through these words, see if any stand out to you. You don't have to have a specific agenda. You can see if your eyes go to a certain one, and as you're thinking about 2020 and what that experience was like for you. So that's just a little prompt for you to start thinking about those words. You don't have to select one. You can if you want to write a few down that stood out to you, or a few things that you want to let go. You can kind of use that slide as you will. We just kind of wanted to tie the reflection and the intention together. So that's one of the ways that we're doing that. But more specifically to the activity. Okay, so we created a Mad Lib for 2020. And so I'm going to send in the chat. This is a Word document. So when you click on the link, it will automatically start downloading a Word document so that you can edit it. So you can like delete the blanks and fill it in with your own words. But if that's not the best for you, what I'm about to do is copy and paste the Mad Lib in the chat. So you can copy and paste it from the chat into your own document if you want, if the Word doc doesn't work for you. So I'll do that in just a second here, but I'll explain the instructions. So if you've ever done a Mad Lib before, it probably won't be too new to you. It's not as directive. Sometimes Mad Libs have, like fill in an adjective or an adverb or things like that. Sometimes I just put blank because it's hard to write one specific thing. Sometimes it will be a few words. So that's kind of the main difference between a traditional Mad Lib. But it's to prompt you to kind of start thinking about 2020. And you can use that as a jumping off point to further conceptualize what 2020 personally meant to you. We'll kind of spend approximately 20 minutes total on this. We'll give you 10 minutes to fill it out and reflect. I filled it out myself too, so I can share what mine looked like as well too. But I'm going to go ahead and change the slide to the Mad Lib. So this is the Mad Lib. I just sent it in the chat. I also included a resource. It didn't fit because my message was too long. If you are struggling to think, so you'll see the first few prompts are about emotions. That really was a struggle for me too, to think about, how was I feeling? So I'm going to include the emotions and feelings wheel link. So you can click on that as well and have that up on another window. So we'll just break for a few minutes. You can feel free to send anything in the chat as things are coming up to you, up for you. Let me know if you're having any trouble with the downloadable link of the activity for the Word document. But I'm going to, I'm going to pause the recording and also allow you to take a moment to fill this out.
So I think the difficult thing about resolutions is that if you don't meet your resolution, you might feel a lot of anxiety or shame or guilt. And a couple of people shared in the chat that they feel those things when they don't meet a goal. So resolutions can be tricky because they're focused on meeting something very specific. You either meet that goal or you don't. And they're typically based more around willpower. And what a lot of research says about New Year's resolutions is that people typically don't meet them and they break them early on. So just thinking about if the goals that you're creating cause you a lot of anxiety and shame, if you can't meet them perfectly, it might be time to think about creating different kinds of goals. And that's more so when intention comes into play. So instead of focusing on an outcome, intentions are more qualitative and they focus more on the journey. So thinking about what do you actually want out of your life and how do you think that you can get there? Intentions acknowledge that you're not going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect the whole way through. They don't demand perfectionism, and they're centered more around being kind towards yourself and having self-compassion and being gentle towards yourself. So a New Year's resolution might be, I want to run 50 miles across 2 months, whereas an intention might be something more like, I want to feel more in tune with my body. And that's something that's more that you want. It's more about what you want versus what you think you should do. So I just think in general that intentions are a lot softer and they give you a lot more compassion than resolutions might. And I kind of already went over some of these things, but just reiterating that intention setting doesn't judge behaviors as good or bad. So it's more about kind of finding compassion for yourself, what makes you feel safe, what makes you feel good, supported, connected, all those words that Brennason mentioned in her Mad Lib. And it helps people be more in tune with their bodies, our hearts, and our minds. So just thinking about focusing on our journey versus the outcome can be really important. And I think that ties back to what we talked about with healing, is that healing is a process. It is a journey. It's not always a smooth journey. A lot of times there might be bumps in the road on the way to healing. It's not linear. And I think that kind of mirrors the process of reaching an intention. So again, these graphics will be sent out with the slides. I know they're kind of difficult to see, but I'll read a couple of them. So we found these graphics that are about 2021 and approaching 2021 in January. And I think these intentions or these reminders are really helpful, especially to people who might identify as survivors. So one of these reminders says, you don't need to be fully healed to be worthy of living a good life. And I think that's a good point. A lot of survivors might feel pressure to just get over it, to just move on with their lives. I think a lot of survivors might think, it's been several years now since something happened to me. Why am I just not over it? Why can I not stop thinking about it? And acknowledging that that's difficult, but you still deserve to have a good life, even if you don't feel fully healed. Other reminders on these graphics are nobody has the right to tell you what path you should take. This is your journey. And that ties back to the forgiveness that we talked about earlier. You don't have to forgive the person or the people who harmed you if you don't want to. That doesn't have to be part of your journey. If it is part of your journey and you want that, that's great. But it's ultimately the individual survivor's choice. And then I'll just read one more reminder. You're allowed to feel everything you feel all the time, always. So just thinking about that feelings wheel that we used, that feelings wheel is huge. There are so many complex emotions on it. It's okay if you feel multiple feelings at once, or if you don't even necessarily know how to identify what you're feeling. So these are just a couple reminders as we enter the new year. And before we move on to the next slide, I'm curious if people would want to share in the chat if there are certain reminders or mantras that you tend to tell yourself, um, maybe when you're struggling or you're not having a very good time. What reminders help you move forward? And I'll type that in the chat. So someone wrote, forgiveness is for you, not for the person. You release yourself when you forgive them. Someone said, this too shall pass. If all you did today was hold yourself together, that is enough. And then Hakuna Matata. So we'll just wait a couple more minutes if people want to share any more reminders that they use in the chat. I'm learning and growing. I'm not sure what HJK means. When I think about the reminders that I have for myself, I don't really have like a specific quote or mantra that I use. But I find that even something really simple, like I can do this, that's actually really helpful for me. Someone shared, I can be changed by what happens to me. I refuse to be reduced by it. I'm grateful I am still breathing. Okay. Thank you so much to everyone who shared. I think that really speaks to the power of self-compassion and being gentle with yourself, being kind to yourself. And that's really what intentions are all about, is being kind to yourself. And then just a couple more graphics. And again, these will be sent out as well. So I think it was either Brennison or Meg who mentioned that they've noticed that instead of New Year's resolutions, they've seen something on social media where people choose a word for 2021. And that's really how they define the year ahead, is choosing a word. And so one example of a word that someone chose for 2021 is embrace. And they made an acrostic out of it. So they chose different words that correspond with the letters of embrace, like entering the unknown with curiosity, remembering your strengths daily, enjoying the journey. And then also just thinking about this year, keeping in mind your vulnerability, radical self compassion, honest, nurturing, unfiltered friendships, not having an answer, being imperfect in the process. So, again, all of this really goes back to intentions and how they are more compassionate and they don't demand perfectionism from people. And just a couple more mantras that came in the chat. Someone said, it's not a struggle, it's a challenge. Someone else said, everything happens for a reason, you can learn and grow from it. So we also wanted to talk briefly about who you want to be. And that's what intentions are typically centered around. But we also want to acknowledge that thinking about who you want to be can be difficult if you're a survivor of abuse or of trauma. Because a lot of times for survivors, we might tend to focus on who we were before the trauma or before the event that harmed us. We think we might split time into before the trauma, during the trauma, and after the trauma. That's not the experience that every survivor has, but it might be for a lot of survivors. And so I think some survivors struggle with, I want to get back to the person that I was before the trauma. And it reminds me of last year. I was at a college campus in St. Paul, and this was only a couple of weeks before the pandemic really set in. But we were fortunate to be able to see Tarana Burke in person. And Tarana is the founder of the Me Too movement. So she came to the college campus that I was at to speak in person. And she was talking about the questions that she is asked by survivors. And she said that one of the most common questions that survivors ask her at her speaking engagements is, how do I get back to the person that I was before my trauma? And I kind of expected her to offer practical tips about how you can do that, but she didn't do that. She said, it's not possible. You can't get back to the person that you were, but instead you can focus on telling your story. And part of telling your story requires getting the story out of your body. And so she was really thinking about, um, your story in a more physical sense, actually getting that out of your body, and finding that comfort again. And so she was very candid about the fact that it's not possible to be the same person that you were before trauma, but you can focus on who you want to be in the future. So that's kind of how I think about intentions in that way, acknowledging that it's difficult, but also acknowledging that survivors have a capacity to change and grow. And so when we think about intentions, they really come more from the heart versus from the brain. They're more about recognizing what areas in our life are not being given a lot of energy, what areas deserve more energy. And that can be something as simple as, maybe you don't get enough sleep and you're not taking care of yourself. Is there an intention that you can create focused around that? So I think this idea of who do I want to be can be difficult for survivors, but it can also be healing in a sense to think about who do you want to be months or even years from now. So if you are interested in writing intentions for yourself, we just pasted a couple of prompts here. So what makes me feel alive? That's one intention that you could focus on. Where is my heart guiding me? What fears am I willing to release? And I noticed that someone had mentioned in the chat that forgiveness can release you. So if forgiveness is something that works for you, that might play into one of your prompts. What do I need to say but have not voiced? If my body could talk, what would it tell me? How am I standing in my own way? So you can kind of see, hopefully, that these are much different from, I want to do X number of things in X time period. They're focused more around, self-compassion and gentleness and kindness to yourself. And we have a long list of words here, which you had also already seen at the beginning. But these are just examples of words that we had found that you could possibly think about for 2021. And I'm just curious right now, before we go into the activity, does someone have a specific word that they're keeping in mind for 2021? Like if 2021 could be a word, what word would it be? So if you have an idea and you'd like to share in the chat, that would be great. And I'll type the question in the chat as well. So one person said unifying, grace, laugh. Someone said cleanse. I want to put healthier foods in my body. Right, so that's an example of intention right there that someone just came up with. Presence. Serendipity. Wholeness. So a lot of different words from different people for 2021. Another person said grace. So I think these words directly go against what a lot of words might have been in your Mad Libs activity, like anxiety, paranoia, fear. thinking about what are more positive words that you can focus on. Breathe, everything cannot be controlled, evolving, good. So I think part of intentions is thinking about the feeling that you want for the year ahead of you, and sometimes choosing words like this can be part of that. Okay, so we have one more activity tonight. And part of the activity involves thinking about the different dimensions in your life. And like I mentioned earlier, a lot of resolutions, especially New Year's resolutions, really tend to focus around the physical, weight loss, appearance, exercising, etc. But also thinking about, for some people, spirituality is a really important part of their life, and that's a dimension in their life. Relationships are a really important dimension for a lot of people. Emotional, um, how you actually feel in your life. Professional, that's another dimension. So sometimes instead of setting um, resolutions for the physical aspect of your life, thinking about intentions for all dimensions of your life. So in this activity, we're going to ask people to think about 5 dimensions in your life, and it could be whatever you want. We just offered those for an idea. So you could choose physical, spiritual, professional, relationships, whatever you like. And then we're going to draw 5 circles to represent each dimension, and you'll write the dimension above the circle. And then from the list of words that we gave you, or even just any word you want to choose, think about what word you want to assign to each dimension, and you'll write it in that circle. And I know this might be kind of confusing as I say it verbally, so we have an illustration of what that looks like. But overall, the activity is really focused on thinking about the different dimensions of your life and what kind of word you want to be in each dimension. So Brennison will talk about the illustration that she created now, because she actually went through this activity.
Yeah, so this is the first stage, the first step. So drew out 5 circles and I made them all like interconnect because they all are related to each other. And I wrote relationships, mind body connection, divinity, emotional and self, or emotions slash self, and then professional. So those are the dimensions that I wanted to focus on. People can definitely think of it as, sometimes people think about the different hats or different things that they, different roles that they have. So it could be, mother, daughter, sister, friend, coworker, boss, whatever. So with whichever dimensions feel the most helpful for you to think about, because of course you can't encompass all that you are in just 5 little dimensions, but you can focus on the ones that are most important to you. Then I also drew a big kind of I don't actually know what that symbol is called, but kind of encompassing the word that I want all of those different dimensions to also mention or talk about. So you'll see I added 3 words, so you can do just one, but I was like, one is not enough, so I wrote 3. So for relationships, I wrote things like connection, belonging, compassion, mind body connection. I wrote patience, patience if I don't meditate every day or do yoga every day or things like that. And I want it to be unifying, and I also want to feel presence with that dimension. In terms of like divinity, I would like to feel more trust and be more releasing and curious about it. For my emotions, I wrote becoming, pause, and awakening as well. Professional, I wrote growth, service, and adaptability. And then for all of these, the word that I wanted to kind of tie it all together was wholeness. So that's just something I wrote out. And you can feel free to start doing that now as well. Um, I went a step further and added a few things of like how I would do that. So again, that can be more of those explicit intentions of I want to have regular check-ins for my relationships. I want to make sure that I'm holding space and others are holding space for me as well, and that I can be generous with my assumptions with my relationships and the people that I'm connected to. And so I wrote more specific things of like meditation and yoga, reading more, having more quiet time, clearing space, learning, accepting the unknown. So some of them are more ambiguous than others. I wrote regular journaling, therapy, taking my emotional temperature. So that's another thing too. I have that feelings wheel saved in my phone. And if I'm feeling myself feeling some type of way, I like sit down, pause, I look at that picture and I say, what am I feeling right now? Can I identify it? What is my temperature? And then I use that to inform how I go about my day and what my next move is. So that's something I want to keep doing because I've definitely experienced a number of days where I've gone without taking my temperature, my emotional temperature, and realizing, wow, I've been mad for days and I haven't like acknowledged it, or this is why I'm acting this way, whatever. In the professional, I wrote like boundaries, communicate my needs, connect to purpose, and keep a learner's mind. So those are things that I thought of. Um, so we'll give some more time for you to think about and draw out your own dimensions and the words. So in that Word document and the PDF that we sent out, if you scroll down, you'll see this activity as well. Would it be more helpful, you can write in the chat, for this visual to be up, or would you prefer to have the list of the different words up? So you can type it in the chat. Because all of the words in blue are words that I gathered from the list of words. So that might be helpful to have too. Okay, I see one vote for list of words, so I'm going to go back to that. So hopefully everyone has their 5 dimensions. So I'll put this here for a few seconds if people don't have them up yet. And then I'll go back to the words. Here we go. So then we'll give you some time to work on this activity and we'll go until we'll give you like, I don't know, maybe like 5 minutes more or 8, you can decide. So I'm going to pause the recording.
So I'm glad that a lot of people found the activity helpful. And it's okay if you didn't find it helpful. You know, you never have to enjoy all of the activities that we're doing here, but I'm glad that people were thinking more about how the different dimensions were interrelated and how a lot of words might apply to multiple dimensions. So I hope that it was more helpful to think about setting intentions versus setting a really strict resolution that either you meet or you don't, and that maybe could lead to a lot of anxiety if you don't meet that resolution. And then we just have a couple of resources specific to intentions here. So if you find yourself interested in setting more intentions or learning more about them after we end the webinar, you can use the links on this slide. I found these really helpful. Some of these go more into depth about the differences between resolutions versus intentions. And also they go more into depth about journaling. We actually were able to find 100 journal therapy prompts for 5 minutes each. And so that's a resource that's also in there. Yeah, someone said freeing was one of the words that they used or how they felt about the activity. We are getting closer to the end of our time here. We have about 15 minutes left, but we wanted to touch on creating a regular journaling practice because we know that some people might be curious about that. And just like with resolutions and reflection, it's completely okay if journaling isn't for you. To be honest, when I was younger, I would try to start journaling and I really did not like it at all. And now I write every single week. So, you know, sometimes it's fluid and it changes over time and it's not for everyone. I think one of the reasons why I used to struggle with journaling is because I thought like you have to sit down every single day and write for 30 minutes. And I thought I can't do that. And journaling doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be rigid or demanding. You don't have to do it every single day. Journaling can last, you know, 5 minutes. Journaling can even be just writing down one word that you feel about the day. And that could be interesting kind of chronologically too. Like, let's say for 6 months, every day you wrote down how you felt about that day with just one word. I think would be interesting to go back and reflect on that and practice reflection and see how your days kind of changed over time. So even if you only have 5 minutes or 2 minutes or 1 minute, that can still be all the time you need for journaling. It might also be difficult to think about what you're going to write, and that's a struggle for me sometimes as well, especially if you have writer's block. So if you want to utilize some of the prompts that we shared throughout the webinar today, that can kind of help jumpstart some ideas. And some people might find it helpful to listen to music as you write. That can be tricky for some people that can be like too much auditory processing while you write, but for other people that might help guide ideas. And then just I wanted to touch on mediums for writing. So when I started journaling, I thought that it was just pen and paper and that's all it had to be, but that's not the case. If you have kids, maybe you're familiar with the fridge poetry. So there's activities where you have word magnets and you can put the word magnets on the fridge and actually create a poem out of them. That can be journaling if you just want to create a poem on your fridge out of those magnets. Or maybe you have like alphabet letters that you use with your kids. You could journal with those. You could put together those letters to create a word for how you feel about the day. Maybe that's easier for you than just writing out your feelings. Or some people like to journal on their phone, their computer, using stencils, etc. And you might have noticed the art throughout the webinar today. There's a lot of really cool journaling art throughout the presentation, like the one on the slide right now, that may not have a lot of words on it, but it's still journaling. So just thinking about if this is something that you want to incorporate for yourself, or you know someone who might want to, that journaling can be really, really flexible. It doesn't have to be writing for 30 minutes every day. And then we just have a couple more prompts here. So I found these ones interesting. If you could wake up tomorrow embodied as the best version of yourself, what would that look like? What is one intention you have in regards to your body, your mind, your relationships? And that's kind of what we just did in that activity right now with the different dimensions. Where have I been playing it safe and how can I change this? And what are ways I can be more present? And I noticed that earlier someone put the word presence in the chat. So I think that a lot of these prompts were things that we were already thinking about today throughout the webinar. And this is another like journaling art photo that I really liked that I added. There's something over the text, so I think it says, sometimes what looks like an ending is just a pause before a new beginning. So this is some journaling art that someone created. But we do have about 10 minutes left. I know we covered a lot, so just wanted to open up the space if anyone has any questions at this point or any comments.
Yes, I would like to say, this is Cynthia West. I have thoroughly enjoyed this webinar. I appreciate the way you ladies presented it. You've given me the awareness to a lot of different things that I think I've just tried to avoid looking at that I needed to look at. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. It's really good to hear that positive feedback. It's really helpful to know how our webinars and activities go, so we know whether to improve. And so it's really great to hear that this was helpful for you. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
This is Carissa. And I also want to thank you. I gained a lot out of the webinar. And one of the most ones, because I've often struggled with writing my ideas out, is just that you can reframe it in so many different ways, whether you do it with pictures or art and drawings. And that's a nice reminder, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Carissa. Yeah, sometimes I have to remind myself of that as well. Like I did a daily poem challenge in December where I wrote one new poem every day, and it was a little overwhelming. But when I think about writing doesn't have to just be like sitting down and writing for 30 minutes. It can be more visually artistic. That really helps me. So I'm glad that reminder helped you as well.
Yeah, Maggie, I really like the idea of visual art. I know, I don't know how many people still own magazines, but my family has a collection of magazines, and sometimes, I'll cut some pictures out, some words from the magazines, and create a vision board. I know that that's been pretty popular for some people to be able to not even associate like writing. They just look at things that they feel drawn to and want to somehow have in their life for that year or just in general. So that's another thing too that people can do. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up then. If people want to share anything in the chat, they totally can, but we wanted to also promote some resources. If you have experienced domestic violence or if you know someone who has, we want to make sure you're equipped with some resources to get some support. And then this is also a giant, if you are located in Minnesota, Violence Free Minnesota, our statewide coalition, has lists of all the different programs in the state as well. And then a little shameless plug, also to follow Violence Free Minnesota on all of these platforms as well. To subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll have this recording uploaded on there as well. Some parts of the reflection section, I forgot to click resume recording, so I apologize for that because some of that was really, really great. So I might find a way to visually represent some of the words that came up in the chat because I think that that was a huge beneficial part of this webinar for me specifically. But thank you all so much for spending some part of your day with us. We really hope that it was helpful for you in reflecting on 2020 and setting intentions for 2021 and just holding space, if anything, for you to just be where you are now and hopefully give you some more resources and some prompts to, incorporate journaling, writing, and any kind of expression capacity into your life if you think that's helpful. And then we do have a post-webinar survey. So this will also be sent out in the follow-up email, but I also wanted to put it in the chat now so people can share their feedback while it's fresh. And so I'm going to send this in the chat. And then you can indicate too if you do want more writing specific workshops like these that are a little more practical and activity based rather than some of our other webinars that have been very content and information heavy. So feel free to send any suggestions, anything that was frustrating, anything you didn't like, anything that you think would be really cool in the future. We want to hear from you. So please fill out that survey.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. Just wanted to echo everything that Brennison mentioned. We really appreciate all of your time tonight. We know that for some of you, this might cut into your dinner hour, depending on where you live. So we really appreciate you spending 1.75 hours with us. And thank you as well for what everyone shared in the chat. I know a lot of what was shared was really personal. So we really appreciate the vulnerability and that all of you embrace that. So just thank you everyone for your time and we hope to stay in touch.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.